It began with a silence that was almost holy. No wind, no voices, no movement. Just the vast emptiness of a world stripped bare. The colony lay in ruins, its towers reduced to twisted skeletons of metal, its once bustling streets choked with ash and dust. Nothing should have remained alive here. By every law of nature, by every measure of probability. Survival was not just unlikely, it was impossible, and yet somehow, humanity persisted. The alien historians who later recorded these events called it the anomaly. They debated endlessly in their academies across their data streams, trying to explain it. How did fragile creatures with soft flesh and brittle bones endure what should have been extinction? How did they defy logic when every calculation said they should have been wiped away? The truth, however, cannot be calculated. It has to be lived. The day the skies cracked open, the colony had no warning. The alien fleet descended like fire from the heavens, weapons scorching the atmosphere, their ships blotting out the sun. Entire defense grids collapsed in minutes. Communication relays vaporized before a single distress signal could escape. The aliens came not to conquer but to erase. They believed extermination was mercy. Within hours, the colony was reduced to rubble. Thousands dead. Survivors scattered, broken, buried beneath steel and stone. The invaders combed through the wreckage methodically, hunting stragglers, ensuring nothing would remain. By their logic, the mission was flawless. By their calculations, there were no survivors. But hidden beneath the ruins, in the shattered skeleton of what once was a hospital, a man clawed his way out from the debris. His name did not matter then. What mattered was that he breathed, when all reason said he should not. His ribs were broken, his skin scorched, his lungs filled with dust and smoke. He should have surrendered to death. Instead, he forced himself upright, gasping like an animal, eyes burning with a single thought: not yet, elsewhere. In collapsed tunnels beneath the colony's transport hub, children huddled in the dark, their cries muffled by fear. Their guardians were gone, their families buried, but one girl held them together. She had no weapon, no training, no plan. All she had was the will to whisper, "Stay quiet. Stay alive. We can make it." In the twisted ruins of a military outpost, a wounded soldier dragged his shattered leg behind him, crawling through ash and fire. His squad was gone, vaporized in the first strike. His armor offered no protection now. Yet he clung to the memory of their voices, of their last stand, and swore he would not let their sacrifice be in vain. These were not heroes. These were not warriors trained for impossible odds. They were humans, fragile, desperate, clinging to life with nothing but pain and determination. And against all reason, they survived. The aliens returned days later, their fleet scanning the ruins for signs of life. They expected silence. They found resistance. The survivors had learned to move like shadows, to breathe in silence, to make the ruins their shelter and their weapon. They scavenged from the dead, turning broken tools into knives, shattered steel into shields. They drank from polluted water, chewed on roots and insects, endured sickness and starvation. They should have died. Logic demanded it. But every morning, they woke again. The invaders began to whisper among themselves, though they would never admit it openly. Why are they still alive? Because humans do not measure survival in probabilities. They do not obey equations. They endure because they must, because somewhere deep in their bones lies the unshakable truth. Surrender is worse than death. The man from the hospital became their scout, crawling through tunnels and ruins, mapping out paths that no alien sensor could detect. The girl with the children became their voice, her whispers keeping panic from devouring them in the night. The soldier with the shattered leg became their shield, standing in front of others when alien patrols closed in, his body broken, but his will unbroken. Together, they were not an army. They were fragments of humanity, stitched together by desperation and hope. And somehow they began to fight back. It started small. An alien patrol vanished in the ruins, their bodies never recovered. A supply cache exploded without warning, scattering debris across the ash-strewn streets. A scout ship was found with its pilot's throat cut, controls smashed. To the aliens, these were anomalies, mistakes in an otherwise perfect extermination. But the mistakes multiplied. The shadows grew teeth. The survivors were not supposed to last a week. But by the 30th day, they had become something else entirely, a force the aliens could not predict. The galaxy would one day ask, how did they survive? The answer was not logic. It was not strength. It was something older, something rawer, something that no species in the stars had ever understood. Because humans do not simply survive, they endure, they adapt, and when death surrounds them, they do the unthinkable, they fight. The aliens had calculated everything, or so they believed. They had studied human biology, mapped human weaknesses, and built strategies around cold probability. A soft-skinned species that required oxygen, water, and food could not possibly endure without infrastructure. Destroy their shelters, poison their air, and they would collapse like sand beneath a wave. That was the theory. The logic was sound. And yet the survivors proved that logic could burn. The colony's ruins became a labyrinth of jagged steel and broken stone. To the aliens, it was debris. To the humans, it was home. They learned which collapsed tunnels connected to basements, which wrecked towers provided cover from orbital scans, which shattered pipes could be rerouted to bring a trickle of clean water. The man who had clawed free of the hospital rubble became a ghost among the ruins. With ribs still cracked and flesh still torn, he moved with the patience of a predator. He marked patrol routes, counted alien footfalls, and whispered maps into the ears of those who needed them. When alien search teams swept through, they often vanished into the dark without leaving a trace. The girl who had gathered the children turned them into messengers. Too small for scanners to track, they slipped through holes in walls and vents in ceilings, carrying scraps of information from one survivor cluster to another. They carried no weapons, but their silence and speed made them vital to the resistance. The soldier with the shattered leg learned to fight differently. He could no longer run, but he could wait. He built traps in the rubble, tripwires with scavenged explosives, jagged pits lined with rebar, beams rigged to collapse when aliens passed beneath them. One patrol after another fell to his patience, their armored bodies reduced to wreckage by improvised ingenuity. The aliens could not comprehend it. They had destroyed the colony's farms and water supplies, yet humans found ways to eat bark and vermin. They had vaporized medical bays, yet humans bound their wounds with cloth and fire. They had assumed morale would collapse, yet every act of defiance seemed to strengthen their will. And slowly, the survivors did more than hide. They began to strike. A squad of aliens marched into a cratered street, their scanners sweeping for life. They did not notice the shadows above them until it was too late. A section of wall, weakened by careful chiseling, collapsed onto them. The humans descended, striking with knives carved from steel, with sharpened pipes, with bare hands, fueled by rage. When the fight ended, the humans did not celebrate. They scavenged. Alien weapons were studied, dismantled, repurposed. Armor was stripped, sensors ripped out, energy packs hoarded. The survivors turned their enemy's strength into their own. Every skirmish was costly. Humans were wounded, killed, buried deeper in ruins. But every victory left the aliens shaken. Their reports grew inconsistent. Anomalous resistance encountered. Casualty rates unexpectedly high. Recommend orbital sterilization, yet orbital fire never came. The aliens' high command still believed the colony had fallen. They refused to admit weakness before their rivals. And so the patrols continued, feeding themselves into the jaws of survivors who should not have existed. By the 60th day, the ruins whispered with new confidence. Fires burned in hidden chambers. Children laughed quietly in basements. The man from the hospital limped less, his body healing through sheer willpower. The girl's voice steadied when she gave orders. The soldiers' traps grew more sophisticated, turning every block into a gauntlet of death. Still, the question haunted them all. How long could they last? Resources dwindled. Infection spread through wounds. Hunger gnawed at every stomach. Logic still said they were doomed, but logic had already failed to kill them. And now something else began to take root in their hearts. Something far more dangerous than fear. Hope. Hope twisted into defiance, and defiance hardened into strategy. The survivors decided they would no longer simply endure. They would fight to reclaim what was theirs. The first coordinated assault came under cover of darkness. A dozen survivors crept through tunnels toward a supply depot guarded by alien soldiers. They carried stolen rifles, makeshift explosives, and nothing to lose. The battle was savage, brutal, waged with screams and smoke. When the dawn rose, the depot was burning, and the survivors had dragged away crates of food, ammunition, and alien medical packs. The aliens were stunned. This was no longer scattered resistance. This was war. In council chambers far from the battlefield, alien strategists reviewed the reports. "It is impossible," one hissed. The colony was sterilized. No species could have endured. Yet the evidence was undeniable. Humans were not only alive, they were learning, adapting, striking back. Against all predictions, against all logic, they refused to be extinguished. And so, with growing unease, the invaders increased their forces. Heavier patrols, more weapons, crueler methods. But what they failed to see was that every escalation only taught humanity more. Every weapon deployed became a tool for the survivors to study, copy, or destroy. It was then that the galaxy's observers began to whisper. Other empires heard rumors of the colony that should have died, of a people who had no right to survive yet clawed their way through fire and ruin. And those whispers carried a question that would echo across the stars. If humans cannot be destroyed by logic, then what can destroy them at all? The aliens adjusted their strategy. No longer content with search patrols and light sweeps, they deployed heavier units into the ruins, armored walkers that stalked like metal beasts, drones that hovered with scanning beams, and squads carrying weapons designed to melt steel in seconds. Logic dictated that escalation would crush the remnants of humanity. A burned ruin could not fight back against machines built for war. A starving population could not resist coordinated sweeps. The aliens told themselves this again and again, reciting it like scripture. But logic faltered once more. When the first armored walker entered the city center, the survivors did not flee. They waited, hidden in the dark like wolves. The soldier with the broken leg, now walking with a crude brace, had studied the alien machines through stolen optics. He noticed the joints, the way the armor shifted when the legs bent, the faint hum of cooling vents. He crafted explosives from scavenged energy cells and rigged them with timers. When the walker lumbered into the heart of the ruins, a thunderous blast rocked its knee joint. The machine staggered. It tried to recover. That was when the survivors attacked, swarming like fire over oil. With pipes and axes, with knives and plasma rifles scavenged from fallen patrols, they tore into the walker until it collapsed in flames. The explosion lit the night sky, and for the first time the survivors shouted, not just in rage, but in triumph. The aliens watching from their orbiting vessels could not understand. Their reports grew frantic. Civilian remnants have developed coordinated tactics. Improvised devices are compromising heavy units. Recommend immediate orbital cleansing. But again, orbital fire was denied. Pride strangled reason. Admitting the need to glass the colony would mean admitting the failure of their ground campaign, and the Empire would not admit weakness, so they pressed harder. Drones swept through the skies, firing beams into buildings where heat signatures flickered. Survivors adapted by masking their heat with mud, with layers of rubble, with water pooled in broken pipes. The drones became less effective, easy targets for ambush when they descended too low. Squads of alien infantry deployed with flamethrowers, scorching entire blocks to cinders. But flames revealed their positions, and from hidden vantage points, survivors struck with stolen rifles. They fought not in open battles, but in shadows. Hit, vanish, strike again. The ruins became a living labyrinth, each street a trap, each building a weapon. The aliens marched in with precision and left in confusion. Still, the cost was high. Every night the survivors counted their dead. Children grew quieter, their eyes too old for their faces. The soldiers stitched wounds with bloody hands. The man from the hospital limped on, though the pain never left him. The girl carried herself like a commander now. But the weight of responsibility bent her shoulders. And yet, their will did not falter, because with every passing week, the impossible became undeniable. They were still alive. It was then the survivors began to strike beyond defense. No longer content to merely endure, they carried the war into alien camps. Under moonless skies, they crawled through grass and rubble until they were within sight of alien command posts. Explosives were planted, guards were eliminated in silence. And when the blast ripped through the camps, the aliens reeled in shock. They had never expected prey to hunt the hunter. The galaxy listened. Other species, long cowed by the alien empire, watched these reports with disbelief. Empires whispered across encrypted channels, if the humans could resist, perhaps others could too. But for the aliens entrenched on the colony, disbelief turned to fear. Their logic, their perfect, flawless calculations, was breaking. One alien officer in his private log confessed, "They do not die as predicted. They adapt. They learn. They endure pain beyond measure. They fight without hope of victory, and yet they fight still. We do not face a species. We face inevitability." The survivors had become something the Empire's algorithms could not compute. A resistance defined not by probability, but by willpower. By the 90th day, the colony ruins no longer looked like a graveyard. Fires burned in hidden forges where alien scrap was reshaped into weapons. Symbols were painted on walls, marks of defiance, reminders that humanity had not fallen. Patrols dared not enter certain districts where survivors struck with ruthless precision. The man, the girl, and the soldier stood together one night in the shadow of a broken tower. They were exhausted, their bodies scarred, their souls weathered. But when they looked out at the burning horizon, they felt something stronger than despair. They felt inevitability of their own. The man whispered, "We were not meant to survive this," the girl answered. "And yet we do." The soldier growled, "Then let us do more than survive." In that moment, their purpose sharpened into something undeniable. They were no longer remnants. They were warriors. They were humanity distilled into its purest form, relentless, furious, unyielding. And though logic screamed that their time was running out, the galaxy itself began to wonder, if humans can survive this, what else are they capable of? The answer was coming, and it would shake the stars. By the 100th day, the war in the ruins no longer resembled the invasion the aliens had envisioned. What was meant to be a swift pacification campaign had become a grinding stalemate, an endless hunt where the hunters were bleeding as much as the prey. The survivors had grown sharper with each passing day. Hunger still gnawed at their bellies and exhaustion still pressed upon their bodies, but they had transformed their weakness into strength. Each scar was a lesson. Each loss was a map. They had no training academies, no military doctrine, no advanced weapons beyond what they scavenged. And yet, they adapted with a speed that confounded the Empire's finest tacticians. The girl, once a child surviving in the shadows, was now a leader. She studied alien patrol routes, memorized their rhythms, and orchestrated ambushes with uncanny precision. Under her command, survivors spread across the ruins in small cells, striking at isolated targets and disappearing before reinforcements arrived. The man, with his limp and his haunted eyes, became a figure the others whispered about. He never sought command, but his instincts saved lives again and again. He could hear danger in the silence, smell traps in the wind, and sense when an attack was coming. Pain had sharpened him into something more than human, something the others began to believe was necessary for their survival. And the soldier, once bitter and broken, became their arm of fire. He taught the survivors how to aim, how to strike, how to dismantle alien weapons and repurpose them. He led raids with reckless courage, his limp no barrier to the fury he carried. When he charged, others followed. When he fought, others believed. Together, they were not just surviving anymore. They were building something the aliens had never expected, a resistance. The aliens could not accept this. Their empire was ancient, vast, and merciless. They had crushed rebellions across 1,000 systems, burned entire civilizations into ash. And yet here, on one forgotten colony world, a handful of humans was defying them. So the empire escalated again. They deployed war beasts bred for terror, creatures taller than buildings, armored hides gleaming under the moons. They unleashed sonic cannons meant to rupture eardrums and shatter morale. They poured resources into ending the human defiance. But for every escalation, the survivors answered with something no calculation could predict: audacity. When the war beasts marched into the ruins, the humans did not scatter. They lured the monsters into narrow alleys lined with explosives. The blasts tore through armor, and the survivors swarmed like ants devouring a fallen predator. When the sonic cannons boomed, the survivors learned to fight through the pain. Blood ran from their ears, but they did not stop. They used the cannon's echo to track their positions and destroy them. The aliens thought humans would break under overwhelming pressure. Instead, pressure forged them, and the galaxy was watching. Pirate lords, resistance groups, and oppressed species whispered about the humans of the ruined colony. Stories spread like wildfire, of a girl who commanded like a general, of a wounded soldier who fought like a storm, of a limping man who became death itself in the shadows. The Empire called them terrorists. Others called them hope. It was then that the survivors struck their boldest blow. The alien command center, a fortress bristling with defenses, was considered untouchable. It was the heart of the invasion, the nerve that guided every patrol, every strike. To even approach it was considered suicide. But suicide had lost its sting for the survivors. They were already living on borrowed time, already defying logic. So they crawled through sewers and tunnels, dragged stolen power cells across broken ground, and set traps where the aliens least expected. When the night came, fire rose to the stars. Explosions ripped through the command center, shattering towers, tearing open defenses. Survivors poured in, screaming their defiance. They fought not to win, but to leave a scar the aliens would never forget. The aliens panicked. Officers screamed orders that went unheard. Troops fled into alleys where shadows consumed them. Systems failed, defenses crumbled, and for the first time since the invasion began, the Empire tasted fear. It was not a decisive victory. The survivors could not hold the fortress. Many of them died in the blaze, their bodies consumed by the fire they had unleashed. But it was enough. Enough to prove that even the Empire's heart could bleed. When dawn rose over the ruins, smoke still coiled into the sky. The survivors stood together, fewer than before, but harder than ever. Their eyes burned with something the aliens could not quantify. Defiance had become destiny. The Empire's leaders debated in shadowed halls. Some demanded the use of orbital weapons, the cleansing fire that would erase the colony entirely. Others warned that to do so would admit failure to the galaxy, would make martyrs of the humans, and inspire rebellion across 100 worlds. Pride chained their hands once again. Meanwhile, in the ruins, the survivors prepared for the next fight. Their numbers were small, their weapons crude, but their spirit had become a storm. And storms did not bow to logic. The man, the girl, and the soldier stood together in silence, watching the smoke drift across the broken horizon. They knew the fight was far from over. They knew the Empire would strike back harder than ever. But they also knew something the aliens did not. They had already survived the impossible, and against all logic, they would keep surviving, because humanity's weapon was not technology, not numbers, not strategy. It was the refusal to die, even when death was certain, and that refusal was spreading. The smoke from the destroyed command center still lingered in the skies, twisting into gray clouds that blotted out the sun. To the aliens, it was a scar. To the survivors, it was a beacon. Word of the assault spread faster than the Empire could suppress it. Across encrypted channels, whispers raced. The humans destroyed a fortress. They struck the Empire and lived. They fight even when logic says they should not. On worlds bound in chains, oppressed peoples listened. Pirate crews that once feared the Empire reconsidered. Even within the Empire's ranks, some soldiers began to wonder if humans could resist like this, what else was possible? The survivors never heard these whispers. They had no access to the galaxy's comms, no awareness of the ripples they had created. They only knew the ruins around them, the hunger in their stomachs, and the fire in their veins. But unknowingly, they had lit a fuse that reached far beyond their world. The Empire, humiliated and enraged, escalated once more. This time they unleashed their warlords. These were not the ordinary soldiers who had marched into the colony months before. These were elites bred for conquest, towering figures clad in living armor, wielding weapons that hummed with the power of suns. Each one had razed civilizations, broken armies, and crushed rebellions. They descended upon the colony with a singular mission: break humanity's back once and for all. The survivors should have fled. Logic said they should have scattered into the wilderness, abandoned the ruins, and vanished into the mountains. But instead they stood their ground. The girl, her face streaked with soot and determination, gathered the survivors. "They believe we will run," she said, her voice carrying over the broken streets. "They believe fear will scatter us. But fear is their weapon, not ours. Ours is something else. Ours is the choice to stay." The man with the limp gritted his teeth. His body ached, his lungs burned, but his eyes gleamed with fire. "If we run now," he said, "we will run forever. Let them come. Let them see what prey can do." And so they prepared. Traps were laid in the rubble. Explosives were buried under cracked asphalt. Ambushes were planned in the shadows of fallen towers. The ruins became a battlefield designed by desperation, sharpened by survival. When the warlords marched in, the ground shook. Their presence was overwhelming, their aura of dominance smothering. To ordinary soldiers, they would have been gods, but to the survivors, they were simply another enemy to bleed. The first warlord strode into the ruins, his weapon a blade that glowed white with plasma. He cut through walls as if they were paper, but when he stepped into the wrong street, the ground exploded beneath him. Rubble collapsed, fire roared, and from the smoke survivors swarmed. They were not stronger. They were not faster. They were simply unwilling to stop. They tore at the warlord with everything they had, and though many died in the attempt, the giant finally fell. His corpse burned in the streets, and the survivors roared in triumph. The second warlord came with thunder in his hands, wielding cannons that fired storms of lightning. Buildings crumbled, survivors screamed, and still they came at him. The soldier with the limp led the charge, dragging a scavenged alien shield as cover. Each strike nearly ended him, but he pressed forward until he rammed an explosive into the warlord's chest. The detonation lit the night like a second sun. One by one, the warlords fell. Each victory came with terrible loss, but with each death, the survivors carved another scar into the Empire's pride. And the galaxy watched. Hidden eyes on distant worlds saw the impossible unfold, fragile humans slaying the giants of the Empire. It was no longer rumor, it was proof. The survivors themselves, battered and broken, stood over the smoldering ruins of their latest battle. The girl's hands trembled as she raised her weapon. The man's leg bled anew from shrapnel. The soldier's shield was melted and useless, and yet they were alive. Against all logic, against every calculation, they were alive. The Empire's High Council convened in desperation. Their advisors demanded orbital bombardment, demanded total annihilation of the colony. But voices of caution whispered that to do so now would spark open rebellion across 100 systems. And in the shadows of that debate, resistance cells on other worlds began to rise. Inspired by the humans, they planted bombs, stole weapons, and struck at the Empire's outposts. They called themselves many things, but all of them invoked the same word, human. The survivors had become a legend, not because they sought it, not because they wished for glory, but because they refused to die when every law of probability demanded their extinction. That refusal had become a contagion, and now it was spreading across the stars. The girl stood atop a crumbling tower that night, staring at the alien ships that hung in orbit. Her voice was quiet, but those around her heard. "We should be dead," she said, "but we are not. We should have been forgotten, but we are not, and because of that, they will never forget us." The man and the soldier stood beside her. They said nothing. They did not need to. Their presence, their scars, their survival was proof enough. The battle was far from over. The Empire would not relent, but something had shifted. The balance of power was no longer measured in weapons or armies. It was measured in will, and the humans had proven that their will was something the galaxy had never seen before. The colony's ruins glowed faintly under a blood-red sky. Fires still burned in broken towers, and smoke curled lazily upward toward the orbiting alien fleet. From above, the world looked like a graveyard, shattered, blackened, lifeless. That was the image the Empire wanted to believe, but inside the rubble, humanity still moved. The survivors gathered in what was once the colony's central square, now little more than cracked stone and ash. They were fewer than when the invasion began, yet their eyes carried a fire brighter than any army's banners. The girl, scarred but unbroken, stood at their center. The man with the limp leaned on a makeshift spear. The soldier, battered and bloodied, cleaned a weapon scavenged from a fallen warlord. They were not an army. They were not supposed to exist. And yet they stood as proof of something the Empire could never erase: defiance. The alien fleet prepared its final move. For months, arrogance had held their hand back from orbital cleansing. But now, with warlords dead, command centers in flames, and whispers of rebellion spreading through the galaxy, the Empire's patience cracked. In the flagship's council chamber, alien generals argued with trembling voices. One demanded the annihilation of the colony. Another warned of the political cost. A third slammed a clawed fist against the table. They should not have survived this long, he hissed. And yet they persist. If we do not erase them now, the galaxy will see them as immortals. The decision was made. Orbital strikes would begin at dawn. The survivors had no way of knowing this, no access to alien transmissions. All they had was instinct, and instinct told them the storm was coming. That night, the girl called them together. Her voice was hoarse, her body trembling, but her words cut through the darkness. "They think tomorrow ends us," she said. "They think fire from the skies will finally finish what they started. But they have thought that before. They thought we would starve. We did not. They thought we would break. We did not. They thought their monsters would crush us. They did not. Tomorrow, when their fire falls, we will still be here, because we are not fighting to win. We are fighting to exist, and existence is enough to terrify them." A silence followed, heavy and absolute. Then, slowly, one by one, the survivors nodded. The man tightened his grip on his spear. The soldier slammed a fist against his chest in salute. The others raised their weapons, broken, dented, stolen, but held high. They did not cheer. They did not roar. Their vow was quieter, heavier, sharper than any battle cry. They would not surrender. When dawn came, the sky split open with fire. Orbital beams carved through the ruins, turning buildings into molten rivers. Towers collapsed, flames consumed entire blocks, and the ground shook as if the world itself was dying. The Empire's officers watched the bombardment in grim silence. At last they thought, "It is finished," but as the dust settled, movement stirred. Out of burning rubble, shadows emerged. Survivors dragged each other from collapsed shelters, bloodied but alive. The man limped forward, coughing smoke from his lungs. The soldier rose from beneath a collapsed wall, his body torn but unyielding. The girl, her face smeared with ash, climbed onto the ruins and raised her weapon high. Against all logic, they had survived again. The Empire's commanders froze. Their calculations had failed. Their certainty had shattered, and in the silence that followed, a single thought spread across the galaxy. If humans cannot be killed by logic, then perhaps they cannot be killed at all. On distant worlds, resistance groups rose with renewed fury. Pirate fleets turned their cannons against Imperial patrols. Oppressed species whispered a single word with reverence and fear: human. The survivors themselves did not know the legend they had become. They only knew the fire in their lungs, the ache in their bones, and the unbreakable truth that survival was victory. That night, as the flames of the bombardment smoldered, the girl, the man, and the soldier sat together in the ruins. None spoke for a long while. The silence between them was not emptiness, but understanding. Finally, the man broke it. "We should not be alive," he said quietly. The soldier gave a grim smile. "And yet here we are." The girl looked toward the burning horizon. Her voice was steady. "Then let the galaxy remember. Against all logic we endure." And with those words, the story of humanity's impossible survival was sealed, not just in the ruins of one colony, but in the hearts of countless beings who would hear it. The Empire would fight on. The war was far from over, but something greater had been born. A legend, a warning, a truth the galaxy would never forget. Humans should not have survived, but they did. And that was the greatest terror of all.